Mr. President, I agree with the distinguished senator from Missouri in every respect, and I hope we get our wish to have that meaningful vote later on today. I thought I would take a few moments to explore a history lesson. You know, Edmund Burke once famously said, "Those who don't know history are destined to repeat it." I think most people agree with that statement, Mr. President, which is why we find so many variations of this quote. One of my favorite variations is by Mark Twain. "History doesn't always repeat itself, but it does rhyme." I think the history of events leading up to World War II is an appropriate period for examination during today's Iran debate. And I believe it's important to explore the question of whether the disastrous history of the Munich Agreement can be instructive to Americans and even to our allies during the current debate. Munich has been cited numerous times in opinion pieces about the Iran agreement, and it has been mentioned on both sides of the debate in this chamber. Furthermore, we've been cautioned, even scolded by various opinion makers around the country that we dare not make comparisons between Munich and the current situation. In this view, even uttering the words Neville Chamberlain or Munich brings to mind such painful memories from the dark past that we simply should not go there. I do not agree. If history does rhyme, perhaps it's helpful to examine history and look for parallels today. For those who may not have recently studied the years leading up to the Second World War, let's review the Munich Agreement. In September of 1938, Hitler's aggression was already fully underway. In his sights at the moment was Czechoslovakia. 4 European leaders met in Munich, Germany, in an ostensible effort to avoid war. Those leaders were Adolf Hitler himself, French Prime Minister Edward Daladier, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, and Britain's Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. The agreement they announced with much fanfare at the end of September 1938 was that Nazi Germany would be given control of the German-speaking portion of Czechoslovakia, known by some as the Sudetenland. In return, Hitler agreed to stop his advance and not to make war. Against the backdrop of all of Germany's aggression to date, of its violations of the Versailles Treaty, the Fuhrer gave his solemn assurance in writing that there would be no more expansionist activity. We all know that upon his return to London, Chamberlain announced triumphantly that there would be peace for our time. The bold headline across the top of the Daily Express displayed the word peace with an exclamation mark. Of course, a number of wise people immediately saw the false dream for what it was. Soon after, Winston Churchill rose in passionate opposition on the floor of Commons. He first made it clear that he held the opponents of the agreement in high personal regard, as many of my colleagues have also done already during this debate. Then he launched into a scathing denunciation of the bad deal, characterizing it as a total and unmitigated defeat for Britain and France, not to mention a betrayal of defenseless Czechoslovakia. He went on to predict correctly that rather than preventing war, the Munich Accord would assure war. Sadly, for millions and millions around the globe, Winston Churchill was correct and Neville Chamberlain was sadly mistaken, tragically mistaken. Within months, Hitler was at it again, annexing the rest of Czechoslovakia and setting his sights on Poland and beyond. I think it is appropriate to ask ourselves, what would Churchill have said about today's debate? And what would Chamberlain be saying if he could speak to us today? Let's look at the parallels. At Munich, Britain and France abandoned a steadfast ally. Similarly, today's agreement has been reached over the strenuous objections of Israel, our most reliable partner in the Middle East. And I must emphasize that this opposition comes not only from the current prime minister and his Likud governing majority, but also from his opponents in previous elections, from virtually every point on Israel's political spectrum, from labor and from center-left voices. Here is the near unanimous outcry from our Israeli friends. Iran poses an existential threat to Israel, and this bad deal makes matters worse. It makes us less safe. It makes our friends, our neighbors, less safe. As the whole world watched, the Munich Agreement sent a chilling message to the rest of Europe and to the rest of the world about what could now be expected from France and England. Today, our Sunni Arab friends in the Middle East are mystified and dismayed by this Iran deal. Understandably, their public reaction has been guarded and even muted. Most are hedging their bets. But make no mistake, this is not the strong anti-proliferation nuclear agreement they had hoped for. This current deal and the Munich deal are also similar when we consider the history and behavior of the parties to the agreements. Like Hitler, the current Iranian regime has repeatedly demonstrated that they have evil motivations and that they cannot be trusted. Consider the most recent activities and pronouncements of the Iranian supreme leader and his team. This deal has been made with a regime that still leads cheers saying death to America and believes in the destruction of the Jewish state. The mullahs, the ayatollahs, and the people in charge of Iran have shown no indication that they are trustworthy. Ayatollah Khamenei last month published a new book that once again makes it explicit that it is Iran's foreign policy to obliterate the state of Israel. Just last week, he called America the Great Satan and said Israel would not exist in 25 years. Israel would not exist in 25 years, according to the other party to this agreement. Under this agreement, embargoes on arms and ballistic missiles will be lifted in 5 and 8 years, respectively, allowing the biggest exporter of terrorism to build up conventional weapons. And have we forgotten the fact that Iran has been cooperating with North Korea on ballistic missiles for years? Of course, the scene in 1938 is not entirely similar with that of today, as has been pointed out. 77 years ago, Nazi Germany at least gave lip service to leaving the rest of the world alone. Wise people knew this to be a lie, but at least the Nazi dictator signed such a promise. Today, the Iranian dictatorship makes no pretense of abandoning its goal, the complete elimination of Israel from the map. And this bad deal gives them the wherewithal to do just that. $100 billion stimulus. The lifting of sanctions, which the United States and our eager European allies have agreed to, will expand Iran's gross domestic product by roughly 1/5, not to mention relief from sanctions on deadly conventional weapons and ballistic missiles. In 1938, Chamberlain said, "Peace for our time." We may wish he had been correct, but such an outcome was so unlikely, the deal so risky and ill-advised, that it was merely a wish, albeit a dangerous and deadly wish. In 2015, Secretary John Kerry has called the current deal a plan to ensure that Iran does not ever possess or acquire a nuclear weapon. Did you hear that, Mr. President? Not just for our time or for a decade, but never, according to the distinguished Secretary of State. President Obama says this agreement marks one more chapter in this pursuit of a safer and more hopeful world. Such statements have a familiar and troubling ring. Such words could have been uttered in 1938. And I wonder if Mr. Chamberlain's followers ever said in defense of the Prime Minister's action, you know, this isn't a very good deal, but what other agreement is out there? What other choice do we have? I'm willing to bet some people actually said that. The other choice might have been to stand up against a murderous bully, to stand by a friend. Mr. President, this resolution of disapproval is not just an opportunity to sound off. It has not been about sending a message. This procedure was designed, as the distinguished senator from Missouri said before me, as the only way to prevent a bad Iran deal from actually going into effect. We always realized it would take a bipartisan majority to succeed. There are currently 58 Democrats and Republicans who are willing to say officially to the president, start over and get our nation a better deal. We frankly need 9 more courageous senators to step forward and say no to this deal. We're told the die is now cast, that the votes simply are not there. But I will say to my colleagues today, there's still time to do better for the American people. The doubts have repeatedly been expressed by senators who have said they will nevertheless vote with the president. Senator Booker, in announcing that he will support the president, said, we are legitimizing Iran's nuclear program and rewarding years of bad behavior. And yet he will vote to support the president. Senator Coons, I'm troubled and deeply concerned. Senator Bennett, none of us knows. And I have deep concerns, according to Senator Bennett. Senator Wyden, it's a big problem having to deal with Iranian leadership that wants a nuclear enrichment program. Senator Peters, enrichment of uranium is a stark departure from America's non-proliferation policies. Indeed it is. Senator Peters goes on to say the agreement could set a dangerous precedent. We need these senators to change their vote and to vote for the resolution of disapproval. Senator Blumenthal said, not the agreement I've sought. Senator Merkley said significant shortcomings. According to Senator Gillibrand, legitimate and serious concerns are there, and Senator Franken acknowledges it isn't a perfect agreement. Mr. President, Alan Dershowitz, a Harvard law professor emeritus, an expert on the Middle East, and hardly a neocon, summed up the president's deal with Iran in this book, in his book, The Case Against the Iran Deal. He said this, and I quote Alan Dershowitz, hope is different from faith, though neither is an appropriate basis on which to roll the dice on a nuclear deal that may well threaten the security of the world. That may well threaten the security of the world, according to Professor Dershowitz. He goes on to say, the deal as currently written will not prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. In all probability, it would merely postpone the catastrophe. Postpone the catastrophe for about a decade while legitimizing its occurrence. He concludes this is not an outcome we can live with. I appreciate people like Alan Dershowitz having the courage to write a book and explain chapter and verse, page by page, the legitimate reasons why this threatens the security of the world and why America should not be willing to live with this deal. I say we should heed the warnings of people like Alan Dershowitz. We should heed the warnings of history. There is still time to reject this ill-advised agreement. There's still time to get a better result for our people, to get a better result for our future. Thank you, Mr. President. And seeing no other speakers, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.